Welcome back to my channel. Hey everyone, thanks for joining me. It's great to have you here. The meadow stretched endlessly, dressed in the soft green of early summer and touched with wildflowers that leaned gently beneath the warmth of the afternoon sun. It was not merely a field, but a world within itself, alive with a quiet music that required no instrument to be heard. Here, even the smallest details held meaning. The murmur of the wind weaving through tall grasses, the darting flight of butterflies, and the rustling of petals, as though they whispered secrets only the heart could understand. It was in this quiet sanctuary that two paths, so different and yet so destined, began to draw toward one another. She had wandered there first, seeking a moment away from the noise of her day, hoping for the peace only solitude could bring. Yet peace can surprise us by arriving in forms we do not expect. Her eyes, softened by reflection, met his with a suddenness that stilled her very breath. No words passed between them at that instant, and none were needed. The meadow itself seemed to rise between them as an unseen language, one that spoke through silence and left both with a sense of recognition deeper than any greeting. The first glance was not bold, nor did it linger with presumption. It was instead something fragile and unspoken, like a thread stretching invisibly between two hearts that had not yet discovered the strength of its hold. She lowered her gaze with a touch of timidity, but her spirit, restless and curious, could not help but return again, as though drawn by something more powerful than reason. He, too, found himself caught, unable to explain why the presence of a stranger felt less like intrusion and more like an answer to an unasked question. Their steps slowed without planning, as though each was unwilling to let the moment escape too quickly. The breeze carried with it the sweet scent of clover and a softness that seemed to wrap them in a quiet promise. There were no rehearsed lines, no dramatic gestures, only the honesty of two souls pausing long enough to hear what silence was trying to say. It was in that pause, long and delicate, that something unnamed began to take root. Every detail became part of their introduction. The sound of a brook winding lazily at the edge of the field, the playful sway of daisies, the golden haze of sunlight turning the meadow into a painting alive with warmth. Each sight and sound filled the space between them, making words almost unnecessary. They were strangers by all practical measure, yet not in spirit. The meadow seemed to know them better than they knew themselves, offering its calm as the backdrop for a meeting that was less about chance and more about inevitability. A smile broke gently upon her lips, one born not of intention but of pure feeling, and his own followed, answering it as though they had shared laughter many times before. That exchange, fleeting and tender, became their conversation. It was not crafted from eloquence, but from a simplicity so profound that it seemed to belong to the meadow itself. If silence was a language, then smiles were its most eloquent verse. The air between them carried a quiet electricity, a sense of discovery wrapped in hesitation. Neither hurried forward nor withdrew, each content to linger in the fragile stillness. There was comfort in not rushing, in letting the moment unfold as naturally as the wind stirred the blossoms. The meadow did not demand urgency, and neither did their hearts. Instead, it allowed them to savor the beginnings of something that had no need for definition, something that belonged entirely to them. When finally a word was spoken, it was soft, almost like an afterthought, but it landed with a weight that silence had already prepared. Voices followed, hesitant at first, then more certain, like ripples widening across a calm pond. They discovered, in the simplest of exchanges, that words could build upon what silence had already begun, yet neither sought to cover that silence completely. It remained there, a foundation as steady as the earth beneath their feet. This was not the grandeur of a dramatic meeting, nor the thunder of destiny announced with flourish. It was quieter, far more delicate, the sort of beginning that passes unnoticed by the world, but is remembered forever by the hearts that lave it. For in that meadow, beneath the sky that stretched so wide and forgiving, two souls discovered that sometimes the most powerful introductions are those where silence speaks first, and words arrive only as gentle companions. And so, in that stillness, their story began. It is in the earliest moments of acquaintance that the smallest gestures often bear the greatest meaning, for it is there, in the unspoken corners of conversation, that the first spark of connection is born. After that quiet introduction in the meadow, there came the delicate unfolding of something neither expected, yet both found themselves unwilling to resist. The silence that had once bound them was now ready to give way to words, though each syllable carried with it the tremor of anticipation. He began with the gentlest remark, not remarkable in itself, yet touched with sincerity. She answered in kind, her voice soft, hesitant, but soon brightened with a courage that comes when one senses safety in another's presence. What followed was not a grand exchange, but rather a tender weaving of light words and shy laughter, the kind that carries no weight and yet fills the air with warmth. Each smile grew easier, each glance lingered a little longer, and the meadow, which had seemed so vast, began to feel like a private world meant only for them. There was something almost childlike in their laughter, as if each was startled by the freedom to be unguarded. A stray breeze sent her hair across her face, and as she brushed it back, his eyes caught the gesture with an attention too swift to disguise. She noticed, and in her noticing, her cheeks warmed, though she turned away as though the flowers at her feet had suddenly become objects of interest. He, too, felt the strange mixture of embarrassment and delight, for it was not in his habit to allow himself to be so easily undone by a single glance. Yet undone he was, and gladly so. The spark between them was not born of dramatic words or sweeping declarations, but of these subtle exchanges. It was there in the way her laughter rang out, brighter than she intended, and in how his smile grew wider when she did not try to hide her amusement. It was there in the pauses that seemed too long for strangers, but not nearly long enough for them. For each pause was filled with a sense that something more waited to be spoken, even if neither could yet summon the courage to speak it. They walked together through the meadow, their steps light, as though neither wished to disturb the charm of the moment. He spoke of simple things, of the weather, of the way the brook curved along the edge of the field, and she answered with an attentiveness that transformed those small observations into something precious. She shared fragments of her own thoughts, not planned, but offered as one gives a small gift, uncertain of its value, yet hoping it may be received with kindness. And indeed, he accepted them with a gratitude that made her feel each word was worth far more than she believed. With every exchange, the air between them seemed to grow brighter, as though the meadow itself had conspired to witness the delicate birth of something new. The sunlight, once only warm, now felt golden. The breeze, once gentle, now carried a sweetness neither had noticed before. Even the silence, when it returned, did not feel empty but alive, charged with the thrill of possibility, for in that silence was the knowledge that both had discovered a joy not in the grand, but in the ordinary, made extraordinary by the presence of the other. It is remarkable how a simple laugh can carry such power, how the smallest glance can awaken a depth of feeling that no deliberate act could summon. They had not sought one another, yet in their meeting they uncovered the beginnings of something that felt less like chance, and more like a truth waiting to be revealed. Their laughter was not only sound, it was permission to hope, to dream, to believe that in the wide expanse of the world, one soul might find another and feel, if only for a moment, entirely understood. Thus, in those shy glances and that gentle laughter, the first spark of love was struck, not with noise and grandeur, but with a quiet magic that even the meadow itself seemed to bless. There are moments in life when the world around us seems to quiet, not because it has grown still, but because the heart has found something that makes all else fall into the background. So it was with them, as their steps found a natural rhythm along the meadow's winding paths. What had begun as chance meetings and shy laughter soon softened into something more enduring. Their conversations, once tentative, deepened with every walk, and in that soft expanse of wildflowers and swaying grass, they discovered that words could carry the weight of unspoken feelings just as silence once had. They walked side by side without urgency, the meadow becoming their sanctuary, a place where time seemed unhurried. The brook that traced the field's edge hummed gently, the birds above stitched their songs into the air, and the breeze lifted their words as though nature itself conspired to preserve them. It was in these walks that they shared not only the small details of their days, but the thoughts that linger closest to the heart, those dreams too delicate to reveal elsewhere, and the fears too heavy to carry alone. Each confession, no matter how simple, seemed to draw them closer, like invisible threads weaving their lives together. She spoke of hopes she had kept quiet, of wishes she thought too fragile to tell another. He listened not merely with attention, but with a reverence that made her feel as though her words were treasures placed into his keeping. In return, he offered pieces of himself he had never before entrusted to another, speaking not with bravado but with a quiet honesty that asked nothing in return but understanding. These talks, shaded by the meadow's embrace, were not grand speeches, yet they held more meaning than the most carefully chosen declarations. The breeze often seemed to play a part in their walks, carrying their words softly between them, lifting them into the air like whispers meant for the meadow as much as for each other. Promises were not spoken outright, yet they hung there, hidden in the way their voices softened when they lingered on each other's names, or in the way they paused, as if to seal certain words into memory. There was an unspoken vow in how their eyes would meet, in how each smile seemed to carry a promise of return, of more days like this, of companionship that would not easily be forgotten. With every step, they carved paths not only through the field, but into each other's lives. The meadow, once simply a place, became a keeper of their secrets, a witness to every glance that carried affection, every word that hinted at a bond neither had the courage yet to fully name. And though they spoke of many things, books and music, the patterns of the sky, the fleeting beauty of each passing season, it was the undercurrent of feeling, unspoken yet undeniable, that gave those conversations their depth. Sometimes they walked without words at all, the silence speaking as eloquently as any story could. In those moments, the mere brushing of her hand near his, the closeness of their steps, or the shared breath as the wind carried the scent of wildflowers, seemed to hold more weight than any sentence. It was then they understood that true intimacy did not always require speech. It required only presence and the willingness to listen to the quiet rhythm of another soul. The meadow itself seemed to change with them. The same path looked different when taken together. The same flowers appeared brighter, the same sun warmer. Even the evening air, when dusk stretched its cool fingers across the field, carried with it a sweetness, as if the day itself sighed in contentment to have witnessed such beginnings. They had no need to declare themselves openly. The meadow knew, the breeze knew, and perhaps, deep within, so did they. In time, these long walks and whispered talks became not just pastimes but rituals, shaping the very fabric of their bond. And though no grand promise had yet been spoken aloud, it was clear to both that something more enduring had taken root in the heart of that meadow. Thus, in the quiet passing of days and the gentle weaving of words, their whispers became the meadow's song, and their promises lived in the breeze. It is a truth often learned with sorrow that love, however tenderly it begins, does not move forward without trials. The meadow had given them serenity, laughter, and whispers of hope, but beyond its borders lay the world with all its demands, doubts, and distances. What had once felt untouched by time soon encountered the weight of circumstance, as if the very air sought to test the strength of what they had found. The first challenge was distance. Days that once belonged to shared walks grew restless when parted. Hours seemed longer, the silence heavier, and the absence of a voice once so near became almost unbearable. Letters carried across the miles brought comfort, but they could not replace the warmth of a glance or the gentleness of laughter shared in person. Each word written was precious, yet each carried the ache of longing. It was in those separations that they discovered how quickly joy could shift into yearning, and how fragile the heart can feel when left to wait. With distance came doubt, not always spoken, but felt in the quiet spaces of thought. She wondered if the meadow's enchantment belonged only to that place, if beyond its fields his affection might fade as swiftly as the blossoms of summer. He, too, wrestled with questions he dared not voice, fearing that her heart might be moved by another in his absence, or that time itself might dull the spark they had kindled together. Love had entered their lives softly, like sunlight upon the grass, but now it stood in the shadow of uncertainty, waiting to prove itself worthy of endurance. Circumstances, too, pressed upon them. Expectations from family, responsibilities that could not be ignored, and the endless demands of daily life conspired to pull them away from the simplicity they had known in the meadow. He carried obligations that weighed heavily upon him, obligations that whispered he must choose duty over desire. She faced her own constraints, caught between the life she had always known and the future she dared to dream. These barriers were not of their making, yet they loomed between them with a force that neither laughter nor whispers could so easily dissolve. There were moments when their bond seemed to bend beneath these trials. Words once spoken with ease now faltered, pauses stretched longer than either intended, and unspoken fears began to color their exchanges. At times, she questioned whether the promises hidden in the breeze had been imagined rather than real. At times, he wondered if their story had been destined only for the meadow, a fleeting chapter and nothing more. Such doubts, though painful, are not strangers to love, for even the strongest flame flickers when the wind grows fierce. Yet it was in these very struggles that the depth of their connection revealed itself. For every fear that rose, there was also a memory strong enough to answer it, the sound of her laughter, the look in his eyes, the silence they had once shared with such contentment. They clung to those memories as proof that what they held was not mere chance, but something worth enduring. When distance stretched too far, hope bridged it. When doubts whispered cruelly, love answered more gently. What they learned was not that love escapes challenges, but that love proves itself through them. The meadow had given them beginnings, but it was the trials beyond that meadow that would shape whether those beginnings would last. Every letter written, every moment of longing endured, every choice made in favor of one another, became a quiet act of resilience. And though the road was neither smooth nor certain, they began to see that the strength of their bond was not measured by the ease of their days, but by their willingness to stand together when days grew hard. So it was that distance, doubts, and circumstance became not merely obstacles, but the very tests that gave their love its shape and its meaning. There comes a time in every tender attachment when silence can no longer protect the heart. What begins with glances, grows with laughter, and deepens through whispered walks, must one day stand at the edge of a choice. It is the moment when fear, with all its cruel persuasions, demands retreat, while courage, quiet yet steadfast, urges confession. For them, this moment arrived as naturally as the seasons, yet with a weight that neither could ignore. They found themselves once more in the meadow, the place that had borne witness to each stage of their growing affection. Yet on this day, the air carried a different stillness, one that pressed upon their hearts with a demand for truth. The sunlight, though golden as before, seemed sharper. The breeze, though gentle, carried with it an urgency. Both knew the time had come when unspoken promises could no longer remain unspoken, when what had been hinted at through smiles and softened words must at last be declared. She felt it first, the heaviness of silence that no laughter could disguise. Her heart, long accustomed to the safety of holding back, urged her to remain guarded, to allow things to continue in their delicate, undefined state. Yet another part of her longed for certainty, longed to know if the feelings she had carried so carefully were returned with equal strength. Her eyes lingered on his, searching, hoping, but also fearing what she might find. He, too, was caught in the struggle. The affection within him had grown too large to remain hidden, yet the very act of speaking it felt like stepping into the unknown. To remain silent would protect him from rejection, but it would also rob him of the chance to claim the joy that had so unexpectedly entered his life. He thought of the countless moments that had led them here, the spark of her laughter, the honesty of their conversations, the solace of their shared silences. Could all of that truly belong only to chance? Or was it something greater, something worth risking all uncertainty for? The meadow, as if aware of their struggle, seemed to hush around them. The brook's steady murmur softened, the air stilled, and even the birds seemed to pause their song, as though granting them space for what must be said. He looked at her, not with boldness, but with a sincerity that sought no disguise. His voice, when it came, trembled slightly, but its honesty was stronger than any falter. He spoke not in grand declarations, but in simple truth, admitting what his heart had known long before his lips had dared to confess, that she had become dear to him in a way no words could fully express, but words must at least attempt to honor. Her breath caught, for the words she had so often hoped to hear now stood between them, real and undeniable. She felt the tide of her own fear rise, pressing her to retreat into the safety of silence, yet she knew silence now would be a wound too deep to heal. Gathering the strength that only love can summon, she answered with her own confession, gentle but steady, admitting that her heart had been his long before either of them had dared to name it. In that exchange, fear lost its hold. Courage, fragile but true, carried them into a new beginning. There was no sudden transformation, no thunderous revelation, only the quiet relief of honesty, the peace that comes when two souls no longer stand apart in secrecy, but together in truth. The meadow seemed to exhale with them, its breeze carrying their words as if to keep them safe, its blossoms nodding as though in approval of what had been spoken. It is in such moments that love proves itself not by the grandeur of speech, but by the bravery of honesty. For silence, however comforting it may seem, cannot nurture the heart forever. Only confession, spoken with courage, has the power to turn uncertainty into something lasting. And so, beneath the open sky and among the wildflowers that had witnessed their every step, they chose truth over fear, and in that choice their love was made whole. There are places in the world that never lose their hold upon us, not because of their beauty alone, but because they become bound to the very fabric of our lives. For them, the meadow was such a place. It had witnessed their first meeting, carried their laughter, sheltered their whispers, and borne the weight of their confessions. It was here that every delicate step of their love had unfolded, until the meadow itself seemed no longer a landscape, but a living memory, one that neither time nor distance could erase. The seasons moved, yet the meadow remained constant, holding its charm with quiet patience. Spring returned with blossoms, each flower rising as if to remind them of beginnings, while summer stretched long, golden days that recalled the warmth of discovery. Even autumn, with its gentle fading colors, seemed to echo the tenderness of their bond, while winter's stillness promised endurance. Each change in the meadow reflected something of their love, teaching them that though time must move forward, the essence of what is most precious remains unbroken. They returned often, not out of habit, but because the place called to them as surely as their hearts called to each other. When they walked its paths, they found themselves retracing not only their steps but their memories. The rustle of grass beneath their feet reminded them of the silences that had once said more than words. The sound of the brook recalled evenings when the current carried away their doubts. Even the wind, sweeping gently across the field, seemed to whisper their promises back to them, as though the meadow had kept every word safe. It became a place of celebration where joy found its fullest expression. A smile exchanged there felt brighter, a kiss carried the weight of eternity, and a simple hand held in another's seemed to affirm that no force in the world could undo what had been made whole. Yet it was not only happiness that bound them to the meadow. When burdens pressed heavily upon their spirits, they sought its calm, knowing it would steady them. The same sky that had sheltered their laughter also absorbed their tears, and in both they felt themselves strengthened. They began to realize that the meadow was no longer just the witness of their love, but its keeper. Every detail of it had become infused with meaning. The bend of a tree where they once paused, the stone beside the brook where they had lingered in thought, the wildflowers that seemed to bloom more brightly in their presence. These were not merely parts of nature, but markers of their story, each one carrying the memory of a glance, a word, or a feeling too sacred to fade. With time, they understood that their love had grown beyond the meadow, yet it always returned to it, as roots return to soil. The world might pull them in countless directions, but here they found their center, their reminder of how it all began. Even when life demanded their strength, the memory of that place, green, endless, and filled with the music of wind and brook, restored them. It was their eternal refuge, not because the meadow itself would never change, but because it lived within them, sealed in memory as brightly as the day they first crossed paths. Years would pass, as years always must, and the world around them would shift. But the meadow remained untouched in their hearts, preserved not by time, but by love. Every return to it was like stepping into a story already written, yet always alive, always breathing with the same magic of their beginning. The meadow had become more than the stage of their love. It was the lasting memory of it, the place where their souls had found each other, and in doing so, found a forever. And so the meadow, once a simple field of grass and wildflowers, became their eternal place where love was sealed in time. Thank you for walking with me through this meadow of love and discovery. Every spark, every whisper, every challenge, and every truth has led us here. May these lasting memories stay with you just as they do with them. If you enjoyed this journey, give it a like. It truly means a lot. And don't forget to subscribe for more heartfelt English stories told just for you.